to Pause for Payments. I'm Kristy Duncan, and I'm really excited today to have an incredibly well-respected leader, former regulator, and payments expert with me today, Maha El Dimachki, who's currently on secondment as Chief Payments Officer at Pay.uk. Maha is based in London, and I'm delighted to have you with me here today. Maha, welcome.
Thank you so much, Kristy. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. So today we're going to talk about money laundering and why it is so important and how it's evolving in today's market, especially in the context of this global pandemic. So Maha, you're a perfect person for this discussion. So let's get started. So fighting financial crime is an important focus of the payments industry around the world, from financial regulators to infrastructure providers and payments firms, including banks and fintechs. Can you tell us a little bit about how big this problem is and why it is so important to have everyone focused on it?
Yes, it is indeed a focus for everyone, and I'm glad it is. I really am, because there's a lot of fraud out there. You know, total fraud in the UK just in the first half of 2020, and this is authorised and unauthorised payment fraud, is estimated at around 1.4 billion. Pounds worth of fraud. You know, the industry is doing a lot to try and prevent and compensate, but it's still quite a large impact on those who are affected by fraud. And frankly, with COVID-19 now, we're also seeing scammers constantly adapting their ways to manipulate people to, you know, hand over their information and their credentials and for them to be able to commit fraud. You know, just this morning I saw a fraudster purporting to be the NHS and you know, you must test because you may have got in touch with somebody who had the virus and they're asking for payment and details and so on. And they're just becoming more sophisticated. And then if we turn to money laundering, you know, there are a lot of estimates of how much money laundering goes on globally. And one of those estimates is around 2 to 5% of global GDP. I mean, that's an estimate, but that's huge. And so, you know, you'd think with these numbers, it's great that everybody is actually focused on fighting financial crime. And, you know, and everyone has their own reasons for why they're fighting financial crime. I mean, if you look at the regulators, you know, the regulators want to ensure that there's adequate consumer protections and there's no vulnerability as a result of people being subject to financial crime and money laundering. You look at the banks, I mean, they want to protect their reputation as safe and secure and resilient. And businesses, you know, they want to ensure that they are protecting their profits. And, you know, if small businesses are hit by financial crime, it's devastating to them. It's a huge cost. So these are costs in one form or another that's getting everybody really focused on ensuring that we have solutions and ways in which to fight financial fraud. But to me, it goes further than that. You know, often these fraudulent payments and money laundering is kind of off the back of a very sinister kind of activity. You know, things that are going on that aren't pleasant at all, like drug trafficking, like human trafficking, other illegal activity. That is devastating, not just because you've lost your money, right? So, and these actually have wider society costs that are sometimes not even, you know, calculated. And that's why law enforcement are kind of working hard to go after these networks and groups. And that's basically it, they're networks and groups. And so it's so crucial for us to, you know, create that network that fights the network. And do it globally. And so that collaboration is really important from my point of view for all of those reasons. And, you know, it's so important to make sure that we are doing everything we can to create, you know, a hostile environment for these fraudsters and scammers to operate in.
Yes, the societal costs go quite far and are far-reaching beyond just the immediate you know, impression that, well, this is just people trying to make money in you know, fraudulent means. But I really cringe at the thought of the human trafficking and the drug trafficking and the really downside implications to our societies globally
Yeah.
with those industries.
Mm.
So our audience is a global community of payments professionals, Maha. Um, can you talk a little bit about the tools that we have to fight these crimes and how do we stay ahead of these very sophisticated and technically savvy scammers and money launderers?
Yeah, happy to. And I think I'll have a bit of a UK angle on this, but I know that a lot of these tools also are implemented around the world. And I think the point that you make is tools, a number of tools, because there isn't a silver bullet. So it has to be a multitude of tools that that we deploy. And some of the examples are, for example, in the cards space, and in the UK and across Europe, we're seeing the soon-to-be implemented strong customer authentication or two-factor authentication, which is a concept that can be deployed for many other applications, not necessarily a payment, and the combination of those factors and how strong the combination could be is really important. And we're seeing behavioral biometrics, for example, as one of those tools, and that's also an evolving area around kind of security and protection. Across the interbank rails, we've implemented just recently in the UK confirmation of payee. And this is a service where you confirm the name to the account number that you're paying before the payment is made. And anecdotal evidence so far is banks are telling us that misdirected payments and fraudulent payments are being reduced. Anecdotal evidence is about by 30% at the moment. But we're also seeing consumers actually noticing that this is happening, and they like it, and they want the service. So that's again another tool across the interbank rails. But we're also seeing many organisations, banks, large retailers, large payments firms using AI and machine learning and which helps them to look at kind of the various patterns of consumer behaviour and spotting where the anomalies are. And then being able to kind of ask questions or stop a payment or report suspicious activity as needed. And that's an evolving area. There's quite a lot of sophisticated tools out there today that are being used, and that continues to grow and get better. And these are just some of the examples of what firms are doing at the moment. And it's always a number of tools that we need to deploy around the world, to be able to minimize fraud. But we equally need to do that in a way where we can't create too much friction. We want to support retail activity. We want to support economic activity. We want to make sure that payments, there's an expectation of them being instant and frictionless, and the journey is user-friendly. So being able to ensure that we're deploying anti-fraud measures and tools without necessarily, impacting that expectation of frictionless and friendly user experience and so on is really important. I mean, we need to support economic activity, particularly where a lot of our economies at the moment are suffering due to the pandemic. And so we want to see economic activity kind of really taking us out of this situation. And so that getting that balance right is really, really important.
Yeah, it always does seem to be the trade-off between convenience and security, right? And um, especially when we're talking fast things, you want the service level. And I heard a rumor, maybe you can confirm it, that when the UK was looking at implementing faster payments, the decision was made to slow it down by 1 second to give the processing technical things more time.
Yeah. So I think it's not necessarily a rumor in that there is a conversation around, is faster payments too fast? But at the end of the day, I think we can really adapt, where are instant payments needed, and where can we, for example, ensure that there is a proposition around slowing the payment, but it makes perfect sense to do that. So it's really, how do we apply, and this is where kind of understanding how the infrastructure works and what standards and rules we set with the infrastructure, and the excitement of me going into this secondment is really to look at these propositions and how can we use what we have and what the the faster payments scheme and the infrastructure does today, how can we deploy it in a way that's actually going to support those propositions, whether it's to fight fraud or whether it's to actually ensure that we are helping new propositions emerge. So you're absolutely right. I think there's a number of different outcomes that we can potentially achieve if we kind of think a bit more creatively about how we do things.
It's fantastic, and by building these new rails, it enables more and more innovation to service the customers and bring new solutions across the market. And then ultimately, UK becomes this center for innovation that then gets exported to the world. So we all benefit.
I hope so. That's the aim.
Indeed, indeed. Many of us are aware of Christine Lagarde's efforts to just put a spotlight on money laundering while she was head of the IMF. And we talked a little bit about some of the tools being developed internally in the UK. Can you talk about perhaps some of the interoperability or some of the global scale approaches that we've used to address money laundering?
Yeah, so that's a really important point because obviously payments are borderless. I think we were talking earlier about how this is a global business, and criminals find ways to scam people from remote locations. Money laundering is a global problem, and so we're seeing that interoperability and that collaboration is really needed. And so the first thing that comes to mind is actually looking at how we implement ISO 20022, the messaging standard, which is being really, a lot of organizations globally are really buying into it and looking to implement ISO 20022 for cross-border payments. And so at Pay.UK, we've engaged industry on how setting the standards can really help in ensuring that it's playing a role in mitigating fraud. So, for example, our proposal, and we've had some good positive support, was to set standards where data can be captured and exchanged alongside a payment. So metadata can be captured and exchanged alongside a payment, and you can have a lot more rich data on the ISO 20022 messaging standard. And so for fraud mitigation, for example, you might say that, the data that you capture is whether a payment has gone through confirmation of payee, or whether the recipient is a trusted beneficiary that the sender has actually identified. So, and there's a whole raft of other things that other institutions around the world would consider as a real benefit to be able to exchange further information with the payment to be able to stop fraud in its tracks. So that's kind of one example. I mean, I mentioned confirmation of payee in the UK. That was implemented across the larger banks, and it was actually by a direction that was issued by the Payment Systems Regulator, the PSR. But actually the industry is looking to implement it across the board. So many other participants who weren't part of that first phase are looking to also implement it and keen to do that. And then with tackling money laundering in particular, one of the services that was developed by Vocalink, our current infrastructure provider, was Mule Insights Tactical Solution. And that really kind of, so far, it looks at the journey of the payment going through Mule accounts and what does that activity look like. And at the moment, it's been more backward looking. So it teaches us what's going on, but it doesn't necessarily stop it. And what's exciting is now there's a lot of conversation around how can we develop that into a tool that's actually going to be a bit more forward-looking, a bit more predictive, and potentially stop money laundering. So, I mean, I have high hopes for that. I think, again, the industry is really coalescing around it, and we'll see how that kind of develops. And, they're kind of, some of the examples. I think I'll mention one more, which, again, really is exciting for me. And it's the conversation around digital identity. Mm-hmm. And so finding how can we ensure that digital identity is not just a tool for, creating new propositions and frictionless, services and so on, but how can we use it to ensure it's fighting crime, financial crime as well, and fighting fraud. So at the end of the day, I think, as payments become more digital, they become more instant. We spoke about kind of instant payments as consumer behavior changes, and technology is changing our lives. How can we make sure that we don't open the door for fraudsters and scammers through that kind of evolution? And we never sit on our laurels, and we make sure that we work together as a network globally to really get the right outcomes for people.
Well, thanks for this. It's so fantastic. And I totally agree that I think fraud and address fraud needs to be an industry level approach and not a competitive issue. We need to collaborate both across our industry within each country, but also on a global scale, because without that, we're only as strong as our weakest link.
Yeah.
So that's where the fraud will migrate, which is, makes it very, very difficult for the whole industry. We all suffer.
Mm-hmm.
One goes down.
Agree.
So
Agree.
lots of opportunity. And the good news is we've got some good technology and it is moving quickly
Yeah.
to help us to improve. And, thankfully with leaders like you and across the industry and across different countries, we will continue to keep that top of mind so that it remains always in our focus. I want
Agree.
to I want to switch gears a little bit just to close off today's discussion, Maha, and talk a little bit about your incredible career journey. And you've got this amazing, perspective as a payments expert and an innovation proponent and a real advocate for the payments market and how we can, add value to our economies and you've got this great career. Can you share with us a little bit about your career journey and what advice you might offer to your younger self?
Oh gosh. I mean, it's interesting. Payments underpin our economy. So, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, maybe too many years ago that I care to remember, I used to tell people this is a really exciting place. And people say, no, I mean, M&A, go into kind of, investment banking. So I'm like, no, you don't understand. And so now we're here and everyone's thinking payments. I said, I told you 25 years ago. When I look back, actually, I can't believe how much I covered in payments, to be honest. I think, globally across so many disciplines, card payments, the interbank rails, in the commercial space, at the regulator, now setting the standards for critical national infrastructure. And I think the key thing is I've always jumped at these opportunities. I've always, grabbed the opportunity and put myself out there. I was always hungry to learn. I needed that mental stimulation. Take feedback. I was always willing to take feedback and trying to break barriers in front of me. And of those, there were many. There were many barriers, but you just find ways in which you break those barriers and take the advice and take the feedback and take it in a way that is going to be helpful to your development. So I really wanted to never lose my authenticity, but really develop and grow as a person, and as an operator in this market, in a market that I've identified is global. It's crucial, and it needs the operations to be running day in, day out, but it also needs a strategic outlook and a strategic view. And to be honest, I didn't do it on my own. I mean, when you have that attitude, people pop up and really help you. And I've had some great people help me. So I didn't do this on my own. I did it because there were some great people who sponsored me, supported me, mentored me along the way. And I think it's important to take our learnings now, and observe what's going on around us and make sure that we use our learnings to actually prop and support others. Which is why I'm passionate about diversity and inclusion, which is why actually, Kristy, what you do is great. You create the dialogue, you create the platform for women around the world. And it doesn't matter, it's brave, it's a confronting conversation, but you create that conversation. And, it's great. That's exactly what we should be doing. So what I try to do is, I try to create a platform for women, you know, for people from diverse ethnic backgrounds to shine. You know, I always challenge the decisions we make. I challenge myself. I challenge my team. You know, our talent pipeline, really important to look at the talent pipeline and, you know, question, is the talent, does it come from those who had, you know, the path ahead of them smoothed to get there and they're the finished product? Or should we be looking for those who didn't potentially had those hurdles and barriers and didn't have a smooth path ahead of them? And, you know, they're looking for us to actually take a chance on them and give them that opportunity. And when you create a talent pool like that, you create a workforce that is, you know, diverse but creative, coming up with new ideas, engaged, and that has to be better for everybody, right? That has to be better for everyone. So, I mean, the way I think of it is, this is one example. Times that by 1,000, times that by 10,000, you start to see change. You know, and to me, you know, that's what drives me. You know, the alternative is just not good enough as far as I'm concerned, and I think you get it. Many people, many of your audience get it, and so I think there's more to do, but we're all in it together.
That's fantastic. I love your insights, Maha. It's like the high performance athlete who's always setting the bar higher and higher. Oh, well, I got this. Now I want to go for this. They keep going. But I love your idea too, that we need to keep building the pipeline and doing what we can to bring them up and mentor them and sponsor them and give them feedback, because feedback is such a gift.
It is.
It can be, and sometimes it takes us out of our comfort zone, and sometimes it makes us look at things in different perspectives, but always well-intentioned and helping us to grow.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So thank you for those insights. This has been a really, really lovely conversation, Maha. I'm in awe of all that you're doing, both professionally and supporting the women coming up in the career path behind you. It's been fascinating learning about money laundering and why it's so important for us all globally to keep fighting it. Thank you so much for sharing this, and it's great for our audience to be able to hear your insights as well.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. And it's a great conversation on a Friday afternoon, so thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you to everybody for joining us here today, and probably not on a Friday afternoon. And please share with us the other Pause Repayments episodes that we do every week with fascinating women leaders like Maha around the world in the payments industry, and lots of opportunities to learn from women leaders across the global payments ecosystem. So thanks everybody for listening.